Imagine this. You walk upstairs into an attic you haven't opened in years, the kind of attic where dust floats in the light like ash, where every box looks like it's been untouched since before you were even born. And in that forgotten space, behind some furniture you don't even remember owning, you find something you weren't supposed to find. A mirror. But not just any mirror, a mirror that shows you one horrifying truth. When you stand in front of it, your reflection looks fine. Normal. Real. But when your wife steps in front of it, nothing. Not a shadow, not a flicker, not even a blur. The glass goes empty like she's not even standing there. Now stop for a moment and ask yourself this. What would you do? Would you tell her? Would you panic? Or would you try to pretend you never saw it at all? Because I can promise you, the moment I discovered that mirror in my attic, my life, and my marriage, changed in ways I was not ready for. And in this video you're going to get the answer you came here for. You're going to find out what that mirror really was, what it revealed about the woman I thought I knew better than anyone in this world, and why I'll never, ever be able to look at her the same way again. And I need you to stay with me because I know how your mind works. You clicked on this story because somewhere deep down you feel it too, that chill in your gut when something just doesn't add up, when a small detail in your life starts whispering that maybe reality isn't as secure as you want to believe. Maybe that's why you're here, because you want to know what happens when that whisper turns into a scream. So let's make a deal. If you give me your attention, if you stay with me until the very end of this story, you're not just going to hear about a strange mirror in an attic. You're going to hear about love, fear, trust, betrayal, and the kind of secret that can shatter everything you thought you knew about the person sleeping right next to you. This isn't just about a mirror, it's about a truth that was waiting for me in the glass, and it's about a choice I never wanted to make. Now before I dive in, I want to set the stage for you. Because this isn't some random haunted house or a creepy hotel off the highway. This was my home. A house I'd lived in for almost a decade, a house filled with memories, laughter, arguments, birthdays, holidays, everything that makes life feel stable and real. I never thought of my attic as anything more than storage. Old furniture, dusty boxes, forgotten junk from the people who lived here before me. It wasn't the kind of place you hung around in. But sometimes the strangest things aren't in dark forests or abandoned asylums. They're right above your head, hiding in your own home, just waiting for you to find them. And trust me, once you know what's up there, you'll never feel safe in your own house again. I remember the day clearly because it started off so ordinary. My wife, Claire, had asked me to go up and grab one of the old boxes of winter clothes. She said she thought she'd stored them there after the last move. Normally, I'd grumble about the dust and the creaky ladder, but that day something in me just agreed too quickly. Like maybe part of me already knew there was something waiting up there. So I pulled down the attic ladder, climbed up, and the air hit me, stale, thick, that smell of insulation and old wood that hasn't been touched in years. I flicked on the single light bulb hanging from the wire, and at first, it was just what I expected. Boxes stacked to the ceiling. Old chairs. A cracked lamp. But then I saw it. The mirror was leaning against the far wall, half covered with a yellowed sheet. It was tall, the kind of mirror you'd see in a grand hallway, with an ornate wooden frame carved with strange twisting patterns that almost looked like vines or flames. My first thought was, I've never seen this before. It wasn't ours. It didn't belong to us. But it was sitting there like it had been waiting. And when I pulled the sheet off, I felt it immediately, that rush of cold air, like the temperature in the attic dropped 10 degrees in an instant. My skin prickled. But when I looked at myself, everything looked fine. Just me, a little dusty, standing in the attic. Normal. I didn't tell Claire about it at first. I don't even know why. Maybe because something inside me said this wasn't just a normal mirror, and if I mentioned it, I'd have to explain the unease I couldn't put into words. So I let it sit. I went downstairs, made some excuse about not finding the box, and that night we ate dinner like always. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. And that's where the real story begins, not with the mirror itself, but with the night I decided to show it to Claire. She thought I was joking at first. I told her, "You've got to see this thing in the attic, it's weird." She laughed, teased me about being superstitious. But I insisted. So we climbed up together, and when she stood in front of it, that's when my world cracked open. Because in that glass, there was nothing. No reflection. She laughed nervously, said maybe the angle was wrong. But I was standing right beside her, and my reflection was clear as day. Hers. Empty. The mirror didn't know she existed. And the look she gave me in that moment, wide eyes, tight jaw, like she'd been caught, it told me something I never wanted to believe she already knew. And that, my friend, is where I'll leave you hanging for now. Because if you think the worst part of this story is just a mirror that won't reflect my wife, you're not ready for what came after. You're not ready for the questions it forced me to ask, for the secrets I uncovered, or for the night when I finally realized why the mirror had been hidden in the first place. Stay with me because the truth behind that reflection, or the lack of one, is darker, deeper, and far more dangerous than you can imagine. When I tell you that I couldn't sleep the night after the attic incident, I mean it in the truest sense. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment in my head, searching for some logical explanation that might make it less terrifying. Maybe the mirror was old and the silver backing was damaged, maybe the angle of the bulb and the way the attic light hit the glass created some trick of the eye, or maybe Claire had just shifted in a way that made her image disappear for a second. But the problem was I'd seen it too clearly. I'd seen my own reflection solid and undeniable, and beside me, where she had stood, there was only a void, an empty pane of glass that seemed to mock the idea of her being there at all. And even worse, when she looked at me afterward, the expression in her eyes wasn't confusion, it was recognition. It was like the mirror had revealed something she'd been hiding, something she thought would never surface. That was what unsettled me more than the missing reflection. The unshaken, guarded way she looked at me as if she already knew I wasn't supposed to find that mirror in the first place. The next morning, everything felt different between us. She cooked breakfast, but there was no hum to her movements like there usually was. Claire was the kind of woman who always filled the silence, whether with music or idle chatter or just little humming noises as she moved around the kitchen. But that morning, nothing. She moved with precision, poured coffee, placed the plates down, and barely met my eyes. I tried to pretend nothing was wrong, to play it casual, because part of me was terrified of breaking the fragile normalcy that still hung in the air. But it was there in every gesture, every pause, every moment of silence. The mirror had drawn a line between us, one we hadn't spoken about, but one we both felt pressing against our skin. And here's where I want you to really step into my shoes, because this is the part of the story where the questions begin to multiply. Think about your own life for a second. The people you trust most, the person who sleeps beside you, who shares meals with you, who laughs with you late into the night, you never stop to wonder if they are who they say they are, because trust is the foundation of everything. But what if one single crack appeared, just one impossible detail that didn't add up? Would you dismiss it, or would you start seeing shadows in every corner, second-guessing every word, every glance, every memory? That's where I was. That's the prison of doubt that mirror put me in. Over the next few days, I started noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. Like the way Claire avoided the attic entirely, even when I mentioned maybe cleaning it out or bringing things down from it. She would quickly change the subject or find a reason why it wasn't necessary. Or the way she avoided mirrors altogether. She had always been someone who liked to check her reflection before leaving the house, smoothing her hair, adjusting her clothes, but suddenly she seemed to bypass every mirror in the house, glancing down instead of looking in the hallway glass, fixing her appearance with just the touch of her hand instead of checking the bathroom mirror. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, that my brain was on high alert after what happened. But the more I watched, the clearer it became, she was deliberately avoiding them. But suspicion is a dangerous thing, because once it takes root, it grows into everything. Soon I wasn't just watching her, I was questioning myself. I thought back over the last few months. Was there a moment where something didn't add up, where her behavior felt off? I remembered her late-night phone calls, the ones she said were with her sister, but the hushed tones never sounded like family chatter. I remembered the time she came home later than usual, saying she'd been caught up at work, but her clothes smelled faintly of smoke even though she worked in an office building where no one smoked. These details, little fragments I hadn't thought much about before, suddenly started fitting into a pattern I couldn't fully name but couldn't ignore either. I also couldn't shake the feeling that someone else might be involved. Maybe she wasn't the only one who knew about the mirror. Maybe whoever left it in our attic left it there for a reason, and Claire wasn't surprised because she already knew what it would show. That thought alone set off a whole new spiral. Was someone trying to expose her? Was it connected to the people who lived in the house before us? Or, and this was the thought that kept me up at night, was it something bigger, something supernatural, something that reached beyond her and into whatever history that mirror carried? I started digging, not directly, because confronting Claire felt too dangerous at that point, but in quiet, subtle ways. I looked up the house's history online, scrolling through property records, old real estate listings, even local news articles. That's when I found something strange. The family who lived there before us, the Monroes, had moved out abruptly about 15 years earlier. No details, no explanations, just an abrupt sale and relocation. And the owner before them? Same story. Each family had stayed less than a decade, and each had left suddenly. It was like the house had a cycle of abandonment, something that drove people out before they planned. It didn't prove anything, but it made me wonder, Was the mirror there the whole time? And if so, how many people before me had seen it and how many lives had it disrupted? But just when I thought I was piecing something together, Claire would do something to confuse me again. She'd laugh at my jokes, touch my hand in that way that reminded me why I loved her, show me photos she found online of vacation spots we might want to visit. And in those moments I'd feel crazy for doubting her at all. She wasn't a stranger, she was my wife, the woman I'd built my life with. Was I really going to let a trick of glass and shadow unravel everything? Or was I falling into some paranoid spiral that would destroy us from the inside out? That's the trap of doubt. It makes you wonder if the problem is really with them or with you. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. And then came the night when I found her standing in the dark living room at 2 a.m, phone in hand, whispering into it with her back turned to me. When I called her name, she jumped, nearly dropped the phone, and quickly ended the call. She gave me some excuse about insomnia, about scrolling through social media and losing track of time. But her voice trembled just enough to tell me it wasn't the truth. I didn't press it right then, but I knew I had caught her in a lie. And lies, once you notice them, don't stay small. They spread, and they make you question every word that comes after. Here's where you, the viewer, need to really lean in. Because this is the point in the story where you'll start forming your own theories. Maybe you think Claire is hiding an affair, maybe you think she's tied to something darker, or maybe you're wondering if the problem is really me, that I've lost my grip, that the mirror wasn't the issue at all but my own unraveling mind. And that's exactly the tension I lived with, not knowing which version of the truth was real. Every path looked possible, every explanation came with its own shadows, and the more I searched for clarity, the deeper the mystery seemed to grow. And then, just when I thought I was losing myself to these questions, something happened that turned the suspicion into undeniable fear. One night, when Claire was asleep beside me, I woke to a noise upstairs. A soft dragging sound like furniture scraping across the attic floor. My heart pounded because I knew there was nothing up there that could move on its own. Quietly, I slipped out of bed, grabbed the flashlight, and crept toward the attic ladder. And when I pulled it down, that sound stopped, leaving only silence so heavy it made the air feel thick. I climbed the steps, one by one, shining the light into the corners, and when it landed on the mirror, I froze. Because this time the sheet I had draped back over it was gone. And the mirror wasn't leaning against the wall anymore, it was standing upright in the center of the attic as if someone had placed it there deliberately. I should have turned and run right then. But something about that empty glass held me. I stepped closer, shining the light onto my reflection. And there I was, shaken, pale, clutching the flashlight like a weapon. But behind me in the reflection, the bed was empty. Claire was gone. And that's where everything began to unravel. I remember standing there in the attic, my breath fogging the air, staring into that mirror with a dread that was heavy enough to pin me in place. My own reflection trembled as I held the flashlight, but the bed in the reflection was empty, the space beside me vacant, as though Claire had vanished from existence itself. I spun around, heart thudding in my chest, and there she was, downstairs, still asleep or at least pretending to be, her quiet breathing echoing through the house. That should have reassured me, but it didn't. If anything, it deepened the fear because what I saw in that glass wasn't just a trick of light, it was a deliberate omission. Something or someone was controlling what that mirror chose to show. And from that night on, nothing in my house felt solid anymore. I tried to hold on to rationality in the days that followed, but the obstacles began piling up, like something was actively working to keep me from finding the truth. The first thing that disappeared was the old box of documents I'd pulled from the basement a week earlier, a box I hadn't thought twice about until it was gone. It had been filled with random papers from the house's previous owners, receipts, faded photographs, even an old folded deed. I remember distinctly setting it down near the hall closet, but when I went back for it, it was gone. Claire claimed she had no idea what I was talking about, and for a brief moment I almost believed her. But later that night, I opened the trunk at the foot of our bed where she kept spare blankets, and wedged beneath them was the lid of that very same box. Empty. As if she had removed its contents and hidden them before I could look any deeper. That was when I started realizing this wasn't just about a strange piece of furniture tucked away in the attic. Someone was moving pieces on the board, erasing evidence, manipulating what I could and couldn't see. And every time I tried to get closer to the heart of it, the path bent away from me, like a maze designed to keep me chasing shadows. Then there was the warning. It came in the most unexpected way. One evening after work, I stopped at a small corner store to grab a coffee before heading home. As I stood in line, an older man in a faded jacket stepped up behind me. I didn't notice him at first until he muttered under his breath, almost as if he was speaking to himself but loud enough for me to hear, "Some mirrors don't show what you want them to." His words made the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight. I turned to look at him, but his eyes didn't meet mine. He just kept staring at the floor, hands trembling slightly as if he'd said too much. When I asked him what he meant, he gave a small shake of his head and shuffled past me, leaving the store without buying a thing. I tried to chase after him, but by the time I stepped outside he was gone. Vanished into the night like he had never been there. I stood there on the sidewalk, clutching my coffee with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, wondering if I had imagined the whole thing. But deep down I knew I hadn't. That warning was meant for me. Still, as unnerving as it was, part of me clung to the idea that I had an ally somewhere, someone who knew what was happening. That hope kept me moving forward, even when every other piece of evidence seemed to slip away. Because the deeper I looked, the more everything around me started to twist. Claire's behavior, for one, grew stranger. She became protective of her phone, keeping it face down on the table, carrying it with her into every room. I started noticing numbers scribbled on scraps of paper she tucked quickly into her pocket when I entered. And more than once, I woke up in the middle of the night to find her standing at the window, staring out at the street as though expecting someone to arrive. When I asked what she was doing, she brushed me off with excuses, couldn't sleep, needed air, but the way her voice quivered told me otherwise. One night, when I finally worked up the nerve to press her, to ask her why she wasn't reflected in the attic mirror, she froze. It wasn't shock or confusion, it was fear. Not the fear of not knowing, but the fear of being exposed. She whispered something I'll never forget, "You weren't supposed to find it." Then she caught herself, shook her head and backpedaled, claiming she had no idea what I was talking about, that I must have dreamt it. But those words had already slipped out, and no matter how she tried to bury them, they lingered like a splinter under my skin. By then I was desperate for answers. I started reaching out quietly to people who had lived on our street longer than us, neighbors who might know something about the house's past. Most brushed me off politely, said they didn't remember much. But one neighbor, a woman named Mrs. Warren who lived 3 doors down, lowered her voice when I asked about the attic. She said she remembered the Monroes, the family before us, and how the wife had seemed unsettled. She mentioned how the woman had started keeping the curtains closed, had stopped appearing in photographs, and eventually had been seen less and less until one day, the whole family moved out without a word. She was a sweet woman, Mrs. Warren whispered, but there was something about her, like she wasn't all there. Or maybe she wasn't all here? She wouldn't explain further. Her eyes darted nervously toward my house as if she had already said too much. I pressed her, but she shook her head, muttered an excuse and shut the door. And just like that, another lead slipped away. But what she said planted a new seed of terror in me. What if this wasn't just about Claire? What if the house itself had some history that drew certain people in, twisted them, erased them from reflections, photographs, from everything that proved they existed? And worse, what if Claire had known from the beginning and had chosen to stay anyway? The more I tried to piece together the puzzle, the more everything seemed designed to keep me from reaching the center. And then came the betrayal, subtle but sharp, the kind you don't want to believe until it's staring you right in the face. I had borrowed Claire's laptop one evening when mine froze, just to check some emails. When I opened her browser, a string of recently visited pages caught my eye. Forums about mirrors that don't reflect, stories of disappearances tied to haunted artifacts, even a local news article archived from years ago about a body found in a nearby river, the victim last seen in a house on our very street. She had erased most of her history, but those tabs had been left open like crumbs leading me somewhere I wasn't meant to go. And as I scrolled through them, I realized this wasn't new to her. She had been searching, digging, maybe even covering her tracks long before I found that mirror. She knew. She had always known. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it outright. Instead, she turned the accusation back on me, demanding why I was snooping, why I couldn't just leave things alone. And the way she said it, the edge in her voice, made me wonder if she wasn't just hiding secrets but protecting them, protecting something that went beyond her, something that might destroy us both if it ever came to light. And just when I thought I couldn't handle another unanswered question, another dead end, another piece of evidence vanishing into thin air, I returned to the attic to see for myself. The mirror was gone. The sheet, the frame, the dust mark where it had stood, all of it wiped clean as if it had never been there at all. But here's the twist, the moment that pulled the rug out from under me entirely. When I spun around in a panic, searching the corners of the attic for it, I caught sight of something I wasn't supposed to see. Claire was standing at the bottom of the ladder, looking up at me, her face calm, almost serene. And in her hands she held a shard of glass. A shard that looked like it had been broken from the mirror itself. She didn't say a word. She just stared at me, and in her eyes I saw not fear, not guilt, but something else. Something darker. And that's when I realized the mirror wasn't lost. It wasn't stolen. It had been broken. But the real question wasn't who broke it, it was why. I stood frozen at the top of the attic steps, my flashlight trembling in my grip, watching Claire as she held that jagged shard of glass like it was both a weapon and a relic. Her expression didn't give me relief or reassurance. It rattled me to my core because it wasn't the look of someone caught red-handed, it was the calm certainty of someone who already knew how this moment would play out. My heart pounded, my mind screaming to ask her what she was doing, why she had it, how the mirror had suddenly vanished when I had just seen it days earlier standing in the center of the attic like it had grown roots. But before I could open my mouth, she slipped the shard into her coat pocket, stepped back down the hallway, and disappeared into the shadows without saying a single word. It was like she had left me a message without speaking. Don't follow me. And I might have convinced myself that this was still just between Claire and me, a private nightmare unraveling within the walls of my home, if not for what happened the very next morning. That was when I got a call from my sister Anna. Now, let me be clear about Anna. She's the kind of person who doesn't rattle easily. She's a nurse, she's dealt with the worst nights in hospitals, she's been through messy breakups, bills stacking up, all the storms life can throw, and she faces them head-on. But when I answered the phone, her voice wasn't steady. It cracked like she was trying to mask fear but couldn't quite hold it in. She said she'd been cleaning out her own attic the night before. Nothing unusual, just moving boxes around, when she found something strange tucked into an old chest. She described it as a photograph, black and white, edges frayed, looking like it had been taken decades ago. And in the photograph was a woman who looked almost exactly like Claire. Same hair, same features, but dressed in clothing from another time, standing in front of what looked like a large, ornate mirror. I felt my stomach twist into knots. Anna laughed nervously, trying to brush it off as coincidence, maybe a relative Claire had never mentioned, but then she said something that made my skin crawl. When she tried to show the picture to her roommate, the woman in the photograph wasn't there anymore. Just an empty room with a mirror in the background. She swore to me that she hadn't imagined it, that she had seen Claire's face there first before it vanished. And the more she tried to explain it, the clearer it became that whatever was happening in my house wasn't confined to me. The mirror's shadow was spreading outward, touching the people closest to me. Suddenly the walls of the mystery pushed out wider. It wasn't just about Claire avoiding her reflection or hiding broken shards in her coat pocket. Now there was history tied to her, photographs appearing in places they shouldn't be, fragments of her existing in timelines that didn't make sense. Was Claire who she said she was, or was she part of something older, something that had lived in this house long before I moved in? And more terrifying than that, if Anna saw her in that picture, did it mean my family was now part of this nightmare too? I tried to piece it together rationally, but every direction I turned only made things more complicated. That night, when I tried to bring it up with Claire, she acted like she had no idea what I was talking about. She smiled in that way she does when she thinks I'm being dramatic, but there was something sharper behind her eyes, something that warned me not to push too hard. She dismissed Anna's story as stress, said old photos can play tricks on the eye, said maybe my sister had seen someone else who happened to resemble her. But the way she leaned on those explanations too quickly, too smoothly, only deepened my suspicion. It was like she had rehearsed excuses for years, waiting for the day someone finally cornered her with the truth. At the same time, I couldn't ignore the growing cracks in my own sanity. I started hearing noises in the house that didn't belong, soft whispers at night that seemed to seep from the attic floorboards, a faint tapping against mirrors in the bathroom or the hallway when no one else was around. I'd look at my reflection and swear it was just a fraction too slow, like the glass needed an extra beat to catch up to me. And once, when I passed the mirror in the upstairs hallway, I swear I saw not one reflection of myself but two, one slightly behind the other, as if something was trying to peel itself loose from me. The contradictions became unbearable. One moment, Claire seemed like the woman I knew, laughing at a sitcom with me on the couch, cooking pasta in the kitchen, humming along to the radio. The next, she was slipping outside in the middle of the night, whispering into her phone, or staring into the darkness with an expression that told me she was somewhere else entirely. My sister's discovery made me wonder, was Claire really just living her life alongside me, or had she been living a double existence all along, one in the daylight and another in the shadows of that mirror? And then, as if to prove how tangled this web was becoming, a new piece of evidence appeared that shattered the little ground I had left to stand on. One afternoon, while cleaning out my desk drawers, I found a folded envelope tucked in the back, one I knew hadn't been there before. Inside was a single note, written in uneven handwriting that didn't match Claire's or mine. It said, "Stop digging before you vanish too." No name. No explanation. Just those chilling words. My first thought was that Claire had planted it, trying to scare me into silence. But when I confronted her, she seemed genuinely baffled. Or at least she was very good at pretending to be. Now I wasn't just questioning her motives, I was questioning everyone's. Could Anna be trusted, or had she somehow been drawn into this deeper than she admitted? Could Claire truly not know about the note, or was this just another layer of her keeping me at arm's length? And who else out there knew about the mirror, enough to warn me off before I got too close to the truth? That night, when I finally crawled into bed, I felt more alone than ever despite having Claire lying just inches away. I stared at the ceiling, mind racing, knowing that with every step forward I took, someone, or something, was trying to erase my trail. The box of documents had vanished. The mirror itself had been broken and hidden. My sister had stumbled onto evidence that contradicted what I thought I knew. And now anonymous warnings were appearing in my own home, daring me to keep going or else face whatever fate had swallowed others before me. And as I lay there, trying to slow the storm in my head, I felt Claire's hand rest gently on mine, the way she used to do when she wanted me to feel safe. But when I turned to look at her, I froze. Because her eyes weren't closed. She wasn't asleep. She was staring at me in the dark, unblinking, like she'd been watching me for hours. And she whispered something so quiet I almost convinced myself I imagined it. It's not me you should be afraid of. The shift came slowly, so quietly at first that I almost convinced myself it was just nerves or exhaustion, but the moment it all clicked I knew I wasn't imagining it anymore. I was being followed. At first, it was just a car idling at the corner when I came out of the grocery store, or a man with a hood pulled over his head lingering a little too long near the gas station where I filled up. But then I started noticing patterns, the same dark sedan parked near my office, the same footsteps echoing half a block behind me when I walked home from the train, and the faint glow of headlights keeping their distance when I drove at night. I'd slow down, they'd slow down. I'd turn down a side street, they'd turn too. At first, I brushed it off, telling myself, "You've been obsessing over the mirror, you're seeing things that aren't there." But my gut said otherwise. And when your gut tells you you're being hunted, you don't ignore it. You can't. It was late one evening when the danger stopped being subtle and became undeniable. I was sitting in the living room, the house dark except for the low flicker of the television, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It wasn't just a random message or spam, it was a photo. A grainy black and white image of my house, taken from the street just minutes earlier. The porch light was still on in the picture just as it was now. And in the reflection of the living room window in that photo, I could see myself sitting on the couch, holding my phone. Someone was outside, close enough to snap it, close enough to watch me. My blood ran cold as I jumped up, locked every door, and yanked the curtains shut. My wife asked me what was wrong, but I didn't know what to tell her anymore. How could I? She still swore up and down that the mirror was just a dusty old antique, but now it felt like someone, or something, was making sure I stayed entangled in its orbit. What made it worse was that she seemed less concerned every time I brought it up, almost detached, like she wasn't even the same person I knew. At dinner the next night, I mentioned the strange car I'd seen again, and instead of alarm or worry, she just shrugged and said maybe I was working myself up. But then I caught the flicker of something in her expression when she thought I wasn't looking, a strange almost smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, but it left me rattled. Was she hiding something? Did she know more than she was letting on? Or had the mirror somehow twisted her, turned her into someone I couldn't recognize anymore? The questions piled up until they became unbearable, and when I checked the attic later that night to look at the mirror again, it was gone. Just gone. No trace, no drag marks, no broken glass. It had vanished from the locked attic without a sound, without explanation, leaving behind only dust and that suffocating silence that now haunted me at every turn. The following morning brought no relief. In fact, it brought something far worse. My wife didn't come downstairs for breakfast, and when I went up to check on her, the bed was empty. Her phone sat on the nightstand, her purse still draped over the chair, and the back door was cracked open as if she'd slipped out into the night without a word. At first, I thought maybe she had gone to the store or to a neighbor's, but by noon there was still no sign of her, and when I called around, no one had seen her. Panic set in as the hours stretched on, every scenario racing through my head. But just when I thought about calling the police, I received another message from that same blocked number. This time it wasn't a photo of me, it was a photo of her. She was standing in front of the mirror, but the terrifying part was that her reflection was missing entirely. Just her body, blank glass behind her. The text underneath simply read, "She belongs here." I can't even describe the way my stomach dropped when I saw it. It felt like my heart had been torn out of my chest, and every nerve in my body screamed that I was in over my head, that I had crossed into something I wasn't meant to touch. My hands shook as I stared at the screen, and for the first time, I wondered if I was already too late. Someone, or something, had taken my wife, and if the mirror had really been at the center of it all, then I had been living beside a trap the entire time. I wanted to storm out of the house, to search the town, to scream her name until someone heard me, but a darker thought anchored me in place. What if whoever sent the photo was watching me right now, waiting for me to make a move? I wish I could tell you the fear faded, but it didn't. That night, I barely slept, my ears tuned to every creak of the floorboards, every shift of the wind against the windows. At one point I thought I heard footsteps on the porch, slow and deliberate, but when I pulled back the curtain the street was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the sensation of eyes on me, watching, waiting, feeding on my fear. And as much as I wanted to run, to leave the house and never come back, I couldn't, not without answers. Not without her. But then came the twist that nearly broke me. Just as dawn was breaking, I received another message. Only this time it wasn't from the unknown number, it was from my wife's phone. 3 words that shattered me more than anything else could: stop looking now. It was around this point that the threads of reality began to unravel in a way that made me doubt not only my surroundings but even my own mind, and I need you to pay close attention here because this is where everything you thought you understood about my story might suddenly collapse. Up until now, I told myself the mirror was some strange, maybe even cursed object that had attached itself to my life, refusing to let me go until I solved its secret. But the plot twisted hard the night my wife finally broke down and admitted something she had been hiding for years, something that turned the entire foundation of my marriage into quicksand. She sat across from me at the dining room table, eyes red from crying, and said, "You're not supposed to have that mirror. It wasn't meant for you, it was meant for me." My heart sank because in that one sentence, I realized she had known about it all along, and the carefully crafted world I thought I lived in had just been blown apart. You know that feeling when you're sure you're safe in your own house, then suddenly you hear a noise that makes you realize you're not alone? That's exactly the shift I felt, except instead of a stranger, it was my own wife who suddenly felt like someone I didn't recognize. She told me the mirror had belonged to her family long before we ever met, that her grandmother kept it hidden for decades, warning everyone never to stand too close. When she moved in with me, she claimed she left it behind at her childhood home, never expecting to see it again. So why was it in our attic? Who had placed it there, and why had it revealed itself to me rather than her? She kept repeating the words, "It was meant for me," like a broken record, but when I pressed her, she refused to explain what that meant. And that's when it clicked. Maybe the reason my wife wasn't reflected in the mirror wasn't a glitch or a curse or a supernatural trick. Maybe it was deliberate. Maybe she had known from the start that she would never appear in its glass. Suddenly, everything about the last few weeks took on a different meaning. The late-night whispers I thought I heard when she was alone, the way she seemed terrified whenever I brought up the attic, the flash of recognition in her eyes when I first told her what the mirror showed me. None of this was new to her. She wasn't confused. She was scared that I had discovered the truth she had been running from her entire life. But here's the part that made my blood run cold. The very next day when I tried to confront her again, she flipped the entire story on me. She said I was imagining things, that the stress of work and lack of sleep were twisting my mind. She even went as far as to suggest I get help, planting the seed that maybe I wasn't as reliable as I thought. And I'll admit, for a moment, I wondered if she was right. Maybe the mirror had gotten under my skin so badly that I was spiraling. But then I found something that silenced that doubt forever. An old photograph buried in one of her grandmother's boxes, showing the mirror in the background of a room, its surface reflecting everyone in the picture, except her. She wasn't a little girl in the photo, she wasn't a teenager. She was exactly the way she looks today, unchanged, frozen in time. That's when the floor seemed to tilt beneath me because it meant one of two things. Either someone had doctored the photo in some twisted attempt to mess with me, or my wife wasn't who I thought she was. And I need you to sit with that for a second, because imagine being married for years only to realize you might not even know what your partner really is. From that point forward, I started looking at her differently, questioning every detail of her life, every story she had ever told me. She claimed she was born in a small town I had never visited, but when I searched for her high school yearbook, she wasn't in it. She said she had a cousin in California, but when I asked to meet them, she always had an excuse. Slowly, the puzzle pieces started rearranging themselves into a shape that terrified me. What if she wasn't missing from the mirror at all? What if the mirror was the only thing honest enough to show me the truth? And what if that truth was that my wife isn't entirely real? I know how crazy that sounds, but the deeper I dug, the more the coincidences stacked up, until it felt like a noose tightening around my neck. Friends who had met her in passing couldn't seem to remember details about her face, like it blurred the second they looked away. Old photos we took together sometimes had strange distortions when she appeared in them. And when I found that her grandmother's maiden name kept appearing in newspaper articles about disappearances in the 1950s and 1960s, it was like a hand gripped the back of my neck and forced me to see what I didn't want to see. The plot twist wasn't just that my wife had been keeping secrets about the mirror. The twist was that my wife herself might be the secret. And the scariest part? The mirror wasn't reflecting her because maybe there was nothing to reflect. It was becoming harder to breathe with the weight of choices pressing down on me because the deeper I dug, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about a strange mirror in the attic anymore. It was about everything I thought I knew about my life, my wife, and even myself. You know that feeling when the walls of your own home don't feel like they belong to you anymore, when each familiar object suddenly looks staged, like it's part of someone else's design? That was what my days had turned into. Every sound at night, every misplaced photograph, every too long silence from my wife became a clue, or at least my paranoia told me so. But now, for the first time, the mystery wasn't some vague fog I was chasing. It had turned personal, demanding choices that no one should ever have to make. And I want you to understand this isn't just a story I'm telling you. This is a moment where you, sitting right now, can feel what it's like when the floor underneath your life starts crumbling and you're forced to decide whether to keep standing still or jump before you're swallowed whole. The ultimatum came in the most unexpected way. A letter slipped under the front door, no envelope, just a folded sheet of paper with jagged handwriting that looked rushed but deliberate. It wasn't addressed to me by name, but the words cut straight to me. Asterisk, choose her or choose the truth, you can't have both. Asterisk, my hands trembled reading it, and I knew immediately that whoever left it wasn't just playing games. They knew me. They knew the mirror. They knew my wife. And as much as I wanted to crumple it and toss it in the fire, the words stayed burned into my mind. Can you imagine being told you have to pick between the person you've built your whole life with and the answers that could unravel every lie you've ever been fed? That's not a simple choice. It's a knife to the chest no matter which side you fall on. That night, lying awake next to her, I couldn't look at her the same way. She breathed calmly, peacefully, as if nothing in her world was wrong, but my mind replayed that letter over and over again. If I confronted her, would she admit to anything? Or would she look me in the eye and deny it all, making me feel like I was losing my grip on reality? The worst part was, for the first time, I wasn't even sure I wanted the truth anymore. What if the truth destroyed the fragile picture of happiness I had left? What if finding out meant realizing I'd been living with a stranger all along? That kind of fear doesn't just keep you awake. It carves into your bones, leaving you restless even in your own skin. The impossible choice grew heavier when my closest friend, Daniel, called me out of nowhere. He never really called unless it was important, but this time his voice carried an urgency I'd never heard before. He told me to stop asking questions, to drop everything about the mirror in the attic and just move on with my life. When I asked him why, he hesitated too long before answering. He finally whispered, "Because some truths will take everything from you if you go chasing them." The strange part was that he knew about the attic before I even told him. That meant he was either involved or someone had gotten to him, and in that moment, I realized even the people I thought I could trust weren't safe harbors anymore. It was like being caught in quicksand. Every time I reached for someone to pull me out, I sank deeper instead. The pressure built to the point where it wasn't about curiosity anymore, it was survival. The mirror wasn't just some antique gathering dust. It was bait, a trap, and I was being forced to decide how far I was willing to follow where it led. My wife started avoiding me in small ways, subtle but noticeable. The way she closed the door when she thought I wasn't watching, the way she flinched when I mentioned the attic, the way she never once asked me why I seemed so distant. And all of it kept circling back to that letter, to the choice someone out there demanded I make. But what if the letter was right? What if chasing the truth meant losing her for good, or worse, exposing her for something I couldn't unsee? So here I am, caught in a web I didn't weave, being pulled in two directions that both feel like cliffs waiting for me to step over the edge. Do I confront her and risk everything crumbling, or do I stay silent and let this mystery grow like a shadow between us? And if I choose her, am I condemning myself to live a lie? That's the kind of choice no one prepares you for, and it's why you can't look away now, because the deeper this goes, the more you're going to realize the truth isn't just about me and my wife. It's about what any of us would be willing to risk when everything we love stands on one side and the answers we can't ignore stand on the other. And as I stared at the mirror once again, this time alone in the dark, my reflection didn't move right away. It lingered, delayed, like someone else was deciding how and when to follow me. Then, slowly it raised its hand, not to me but to point over my shoulder. I turned, my heart pounding, but nothing was there. Nothing I could see anyway. And that was when I realized, the choice might not even be mine to make anymore. It was like the walls were closing in, the whole picture of the nightmare finally starting to come into focus. And yet with every piece of clarity came another wave of dread that made it impossible to breathe easily. What I thought had been just a strange reflection in an attic mirror, just a bizarre glitch in reality that showed me a world where my wife didn't exist, was now unraveling into something far larger, darker, and more orchestrated than I could ever have prepared myself for. And as much as I wanted to believe I was still in control, that this was just a personal mystery I could solve if I stayed sharp and cautious, I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. This wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about my marriage. It wasn't even about my family. It was about something bigger, something that reached out like a shadow into the lives of others, and once I recognized that, it was already too late to pretend I could walk away from it. I started piecing together the fragments of conversations, the odd coincidences, the people who had appeared at just the wrong time and whispered the wrong words. That neighbor who pretended not to hear me when I asked about the old owners of the house, the realtor who brushed off my questions with a rehearsed smile, even my wife's sudden distance whenever I asked about her family history, it all felt rehearsed, like they were reading lines from a script they hadn't written themselves. And then came the phone call late at night, when I was alone in the living room staring at that cursed mirror after dragging it downstairs like some kind of proof I wasn't losing my mind. The voice on the other end didn't identify themselves, didn't need to. They simply said, "Stop looking or you'll lose more than your reflection." That was the moment I realized this wasn't paranoia. Someone knew what I had seen. Someone had been watching me closely enough to know when to strike. The strangest part was how quickly everything spiraled after that. Friends I thought I could confide in suddenly weren't answering my texts. My boss at work asked me casually why I seemed so distracted lately, almost as if he already knew what was pulling at my focus, and when I pressed him, he shut down instantly like I had crossed a line I didn't even know existed. My own brother, who I thought would believe me no matter what, hung up on me when I tried to explain the mirror and the missing reflection. And the next day he texted me something that felt more like a warning than advice. "Drop it. Please. For your sake." It was the first time in my life I felt like every single person around me was either lying or hiding something, and the cruelest part was that the one person I wanted to turn to, the person I married, the person I built a life with, was the very image erased from that mirror, as though the universe itself was telling me she was part of the lie. Then came the betrayal, sharp and cutting like a knife I never saw coming. I was sitting across from her at dinner, trying not to bring it up again because I had promised myself I wouldn't drive her further away, when she put down her fork, looked me straight in the eye and asked, "Why are you still asking about the mirror? Didn't we agree to get rid of it?" But we hadn't. Not once had she ever acknowledged the mirror existed, let alone suggested destroying it. I froze, my heart hammering, and asked her how she even knew about it in the first place. She went pale, too pale, and in that second I knew, I wasn't just imagining things. She had known all along. She had been hiding something from me since the very beginning. And the fear in her eyes wasn't about me discovering the truth. It was about me realizing she wasn't the person I thought she was. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house felt staged, every shadow stretched too far, and I knew without a doubt that the conspiracy wasn't just circling me, it was inside my home. I replayed every moment of the past weeks and started to see the patterns, the manipulation, the way people had subtly guided my thoughts, kept me second-guessing myself, made me feel crazy enough to back down. This wasn't about a single haunted object. This was about control. About silencing people who saw too much. And I had seen too much. That mirror wasn't broken glass. It was a doorway, a test, something that exposed cracks in the world that weren't supposed to be noticed. And once you noticed them, you became a target. But the worst realization of all was this: I wasn't the first. Someone else had been here before me, someone who had left behind traces in the attic that I had ignored. The initials carved faintly into the wood, the torn photograph I had dismissed as trash, the old newspaper clipping folded into the corner of a box. I pulled them out one by one, and they told a story of another family who had lived here decades ago, another man who had stared into the glass and seen his life unravel. His wife had vanished under mysterious circumstances. His children had been removed from the home, and he had been declared mentally unstable before disappearing without a trace. And just like me, he had tried to warn others, but the record showed he had been silenced before the truth could spread. That was when it clicked. This was a cycle. A trap. The mirror wasn't random, and neither was my discovery of it. Someone wanted me to find it, wanted me to play out this story all over again like some cruel rerun, and the moment I did, I was ensnared in the same web. And if that was true, if history was really repeating itself, then the person closest to me, the one I had vowed to trust, wasn't just lying, she was playing a role. Maybe willingly, maybe not, but either way she wasn't on my side anymore. And if that was the case, then who could I trust? Who could I turn to when every voice, every friend, every family member was either complicit or silenced? The more I dug, the clearer it became that the conspiracy wasn't just personal. It was generational. Families tied together by secrets no one dared to speak aloud. Entire neighborhoods complicit in maintaining a story that hid the real one beneath it. And me? I had just stumbled into the middle of it, too stubborn or too curious to stop when I had the chance. But now I couldn't back out even if I wanted to, because the truth wasn't just about whether my wife's reflection existed in that mirror anymore. It was about the fact that if I didn't keep pushing, if I didn't uncover every layer of this nightmare, I might lose everything. My wife, my sanity, my life, just like the man before me. And the scariest part? The deeper I looked, the more the mirror itself began to change, showing me glimpses of people I didn't know, places I had never been, lives that weren't mine. As though it wasn't reflecting my world anymore, it was reflecting theirs. Whoever they were. And I couldn't help but wonder if I was staring at the faces of the ones who had been trapped before me, or the ones who were still watching, waiting, pulling the strings behind the glass. The night of truth came faster than I was ready for, and by then it wasn't just about what the mirror showed anymore, it was about survival. I remember standing in the attic, that old bulb flickering above me, the wooden beams groaning like the house itself was holding its breath, and realizing that everything had been leading to this one moment. Every lie, every missing piece, every warning I had brushed off was now flooding back into me, and the mirror stood there waiting, pulsing with a strange energy like it knew exactly what I was about to find out. My wife stood a few steps behind me, her voice trembling, telling me not to do this, begging me to walk away before it was too late, but the truth had wrapped itself around my mind like a vice and I couldn't stop, not now, not when the shadows had grown bold enough to whisper my name. I could feel the weight of something bigger than me pressing down, as if the attic wasn't just a room but the stage for a reckoning I had unknowingly walked into. As I stepped closer to the mirror, I realized the glass wasn't smooth anymore. It rippled faintly like water disturbed by the wind, and my reflection stared back at me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. But when I shifted to the side, my wife's image never appeared. She was in the room with me, I could hear her breath, her pleas, her footsteps, but the mirror stubbornly refused to acknowledge her presence, as if she were a ghost clinging to a reality that no longer wanted her. That was when I noticed something I had overlooked before. Faint etchings carved into the frame, words half buried under years of dust, and when I brushed them clean, the truth hit me with a force that nearly knocked me back. It wasn't just a mirror. It was a binding. A cage. A witness. My heart raced as I realized the object wasn't designed to show reality, it was designed to reveal what reality had tried to erase. The attic door slammed shut behind me with a thunderous crack, and I spun to see a figure step from the shadows, someone I hadn't expected, someone who had been close to me all along but had never once drawn suspicion. It was my brother. His eyes burned with a cold fury, and the way he looked at my wife sent shivers through me. He told me I was never supposed to find the mirror, that it was hidden for a reason, and that dragging it into the light again would undo everything he had spent years protecting. I demanded answers, my voice shaking as much with fear as anger, and that's when he said it, that the woman I called my wife had never been mine at all. The words twisted in my chest like a knife, but before I could react, he turned his gaze on her and spoke to her like he knew her better than I ever had, like they shared a secret I had been deliberately cut out of. My wife finally snapped, her voice rising above the creaking floorboards and the pulsing mirror, confessing what I had been too blind to see. She said she wasn't supposed to exist in this version of life, that the mirror had chosen me and her paths had crossed because of something I could never fully understand. She said every reflection I had ever seen of myself had been altered, reshaped, rewritten by forces I couldn't name, and that the mirror wasn't broken, it was honest. It wasn't her reflection that was missing. It was mine that had been false all along. My brother tried to silence her, but the mirror began to hum louder, the surface trembling like it was alive, and suddenly it wasn't just reflecting me anymore. It was showing memories, flashes of nights I had forgotten, fragments of conversations I never remembered having, glimpses of a life that looked like mine but wasn't mine. The attic shook as if the house itself was being torn apart, and I realized I was standing between two impossible choices. Trust the woman I had shared my life with, who might not even belong to this world, or trust my brother, who claimed he had been protecting me from a truth that would destroy everything. The mirror's glow intensified until it was blinding, pulling at me like a tide, and I felt myself slipping, my very identity unraveling as if the glass was trying to consume me whole. My wife reached for me, screaming my name, while my brother shouted for me to resist her, and in that moment, I knew whichever hand I took would seal my fate. I made my choice, but as the glass cracked with a deafening shatter and the attic plunged into darkness, I realized too late that there had been a third presence all along. A shadow stepped forward from inside the mirror itself, a figure that looked like me, moved like me, but smiled with a cruelty I had never seen on my own face. The reflection had been waiting for this moment, biding its time until the cage broke, and now it was free. And that's where everything ends, or maybe that's where it truly begins. When the mirror shattered, it wasn't the sound of glass breaking that haunted me, it was the silence that followed. For a long time I thought I had fallen into nothingness, into a void where time no longer moved, but slowly I began to realize that I was still standing in the attic, though it looked different now, stripped of its weight, as if the house itself had exhaled after years of holding something it didn't want. My wife was on her knees, trembling, tears streaming down her face, while my brother leaned against the far wall, his body broken not by violence but by truth itself. The reflection, my other self, was gone, though its presence lingered in the shadows, leaving me to wonder whether it had truly vanished or if it had simply slipped into some corner of the world where I could no longer see it. The mirror's fragments glowed faintly on the floor, each shard reflecting not my face but different memories, moments of my life scattered like pieces of a puzzle, and for the first time I understood that what I had been chasing wasn't an enemy, it was myself, or at least the version of me I had buried to survive. The final answers came not through confrontation but through quiet realization. My brother confessed that years ago something had gone wrong, a rift, a choice, a fracture in time, that brought two versions of me into existence. He had hidden the mirror because it was the only thing that could reveal the split, and he thought if I never found it I could live a normal life. My wife, or the woman I thought was my wife, admitted that she had known the truth all along, that she wasn't truly from here, but had crossed over when the boundary weakened. She loved me, but she wasn't mine in the way I wanted her to be, she belonged to the version of me that had been locked away inside the mirror. Every sleepless night, every unexplainable whisper, every feeling that I was living a life slightly off its axis, all of it was the residue of that broken history. The horror wasn't that I had been deceived, it was that reality itself had been rearranged around me, and I had been living on borrowed time. And yet, in that attic filled with broken glass and broken truths, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace. Because even though I couldn't fix the fracture, I could finally stop running from it. The reflection wasn't my enemy, nor was my wife or my brother, it was the part of me I had refused to face, the part that had been waiting in the dark, reminding me that none of us can escape who we are. I gathered the shards of the mirror and buried them in the earth far away from the house, not to hide the truth again but to let it rest. My wife chose to leave, not out of malice but because she understood she was never meant to stay, and my brother disappeared not long after, perhaps unable to forgive himself for the life he had tried to protect me from. Now, when I walk through the halls of my home at night, the silence feels different. The creaks in the floorboards no longer sound like whispers, the shadows no longer hold threats, they simply are. I live quietly, aware that somewhere out there my reflection might still be waiting, watching, maybe even living a life of its own, but I no longer fear it. Because I know that life isn't about which version of us is real, but about which version we choose to live. And that choice, fragile and fleeting as it may be, belongs to me. Still, sometimes when I pass a mirror, I hesitate. Most of the time I see only myself, tired but whole, scarred but alive. But every now and then, just for a second, I catch a glimpse of something else. A smile that isn't mine. Eyes that linger too long. A reminder that the story isn't over, not really, because the past doesn't disappear. It waits, patient and quiet, in the reflection. And that thought stays with me long after I've walked away, like an echo I can never quite silence, leaving me to wonder if one day the glass will call me back again.